So, today we're going to be talking about how in the medtech landscape, the path to commercialization is rarely linear, right? So, rarely funding with one single partner. So, we're hoping that this session helps you to think about your A goal, which may be an acquisition or strategic partnership, but how do you continue moving forward with your B plan and your C plan? And my speakers here will be able to offer some real insights into that and also looking at your partnerships in maybe a different perspective, not just funding, not just commercialization partnership, but also from an IP perspective. So I'm happy to present Ramin Mousavi, President and CEO of CathWorks, and Alex Lin from Mayo Clinic Ventures. And so having a clear path for critical, long-term sustainability is really important. And Ramin, I think you've done a good job of that throughout your experience with your 2 rounds with CathWorks. So take us through your journey a little bit from your first time around with CathWorks, your first attempt at partnership, and then your second round.
Sure. As you mentioned, we are very lucky. We have a great team. They've done a great work, and they've been very resilient. So we've had 2 different experiences. We'll call it CathWorks 1.0 and 2.0. And we've tried to do the same thing twice. We failed really, really, really good the first time, which gave us a lot of learning for the second time. The concept was, as you tried to construct it, how do you create something sustainable? I'm of the belief that if you have a technology that has a lot of promise, if you want it to become standard of care, it is really hard to do that in a startup setting. Even if you were given all the money in the world, which you will never be given, but even if you were given that, when you count for time, you will be in a very difficult position to create a channel that can actually reach globally for something to truly become standard of care. We believe the technology that we have, so we combine AI and computational science, fancy word for algorithm, to non-invasively detect coronary artery disease, which is the #1 cause of death. The mindset was, if we partner with the right strategics from the get-go, eventually you can tap into their channel because this will be a better thing in their bag. And we were very lucky that we had multiple strategics, as investors in our cap table. Makes your board meetings very interesting, when you have all of them there. We tried to do this the first time around and it failed. You have had some visibility to that, years ago, and really was based on the fact that the technology wasn't ready, which is one of the things that founders and CEOs of startups have a hard time accepting. We did too, but eventually we had to acknowledge and learn that. And so this is the sustainable kind of growth thing, is that can you create something that can repeat itself over and over? We had to take that learning, coming back from our partners at Medtronic, and go back to the drawing board and change the technology, and make it what we were hearing back from the customers. In the CathWorks 2.0, we took that back to the customers, and it turned out that they actually told us the truth because we put that in front of them, and the same customers accepted that. We went back to the same construct that can we tap into the existing channel here, the co-promotion that we have in Medtronic, and actually worked out. We've been able to see an amazing growth of the technology, a fantastic adoption across the globe, something that most of startups don't get to do. And the fact that we are here in Asia is because we're growing that into APAC, which is something you don't get to do as a startup that often. So I'm a big believer of, if you have a way to expand this out using established channels, maybe it's a little aspiring, maybe more pragmatic than some like to see it that way. It does work, but it comes with its own learning, and we've had the luxury of learning it in a real way.
Right. A couple of questions going back to 1.0 attempt, because I actually was with Chronic BD at the time, so I was seeing what was going on behind the scenes. Dave Allen in the last a session earlier today, Medtronic BD as well, he made a good point of one of the most important things along that journey is, or maybe it was Kristi, but it was building the relationship and the trust, because you also don't know what is going on the strategic side behind the scenes of what they're looking for. It could be we're looking for a a long-term partner to develop technology with, which we'll get to with Alex. It could also be that we're looking for near-term revenue, like they want to acquire something that immediately can help their P&L. Was Medtronic that first time very open with you about really, truly, it's the technology, or there are other things that were at play that didn't make it the right timing match?
I think on reflection they were. I don't think at the time we saw it that way. It felt like very vague and it was like, why are you picking at this? And I think Medtronic very clearly, all the strategics that invested in CathWorks saw a potential for a disruptive technology that I think they believed needed to be proven. Now when you're sitting inside the startup, it's really hard. You're skeptical and like, why you're not really believing in this thing that we believe in. I think they signaled to us very clearly that what they wanted was they wanted it to be in the startup construct because we get to go a lot faster. I'm sure you will touch on that. That's the benefit of a startup. You can go a lot faster. You can fail a lot faster than you would do in a larger company. You've been on the other side. The speed is something that goes away. I think they told us what we needed to hear. Now, we were probably not as good listening, very quickly, but eventually as we listened, there was one clear thing they were looking for. They wanted to see the adoption in a way that they could scale it. That's the feedback that we ultimately had to, sit down and reflect and understand. And it's really hard because when you raise a lot of money and you tell your investors that the product is going to be ready by such a milestone, when you miss that, you have to go back to the drawing board and say, hey, just kidding, we're not ready. But I do recommend very strongly to my peers when we talk that if you haven't taken the time to build a relationship early on with the strategics, that who are the targets for your technology, you should take the time from early times. And I do, having worked, half of my career at the strategics and being on the other side of it, they will give you good feedback of what they're looking for. And if they don't, you can ask questions. And, in good faith, most of the strategics will tell you what is it that they really want. Are you and the management team ready to take that feedback? That's a different story. And I think that's what we had to get really good at, listening to that feedback.
We often see startups thinking, oh, I'll get to the documentation that's required once, we're ready to go for due diligence and opening our data room. But you never know when that timeline can shift quickly. So how were you preparing for that when after 1.0 and you came on then a second time back to CathWorks as CEO, and I believe you and Jason Weidman got that deal done within a matter of 8 or 9 months?
Yeah, we really got it done in, I think, 90 days. It took 6 more months for the lawyers to come to an agreement. We had our deal, I think, in 90 days. And, it was a lot of trust because it's a series of agreements. It's one of the most complex build to buy deals that goes out there. But I mean, I'm going to force the issue to ask, how many people here have been involved in any sort of diligence? Just raise your hand if you've been, involved in any sort of diligence. Well, it's the most vivid way I can explain it to you. It's like colonoscopy without anesthesia. That's how it is. So what you have to do is you can't say, I'm going to do my stuff and then we're going to get to diligence and then we're going to be ready. You have to be mid-flight and be ready. So what we learned, I mean, we are very, very lucky that we have a really good team that have worked with each other for a long time. When you're a startup, it's not like you can pull the entire team in when you do diligence. It's a very sensitive thing. And as you were privy to the 1.0, when a diligence falls apart, it's a heartbreak that takes a psychological thing to recover from. I remember it took me a couple of days after the first deal fell apart to just figure out what are we going to do. So we learn now to treat it as if at any given time you're ready to do the diligence and understanding the difference between the two worlds, because you get hundreds of people at the strategic and the same 4 or 5 people in the startup. So how do you make the two work together?
I don't know what is more stressful, an FDA audit or going through diligence.
I think it's diligence, because you know what the FDA, I mean, most FDA audits, you get in trouble because you're not following your own documentation. FDA has some rules. Most companies decide to get creative and have their own rules that are more strict to FDA, which FDA is fine with that. But then when you come back, they want to make sure you meet your own, and you don't, then you have a problem. I think the diligence is really hard because you find some third-year quality engineer who's scared of their life to accept some documents, so they keep asking questions. So we've learned that the best way to do it to put the most strict person on your team as a correspondent. So in our case, it's easy. We put our CFO, and he's like he will say no to everything.
Well, I want to come back. I have more questions on your overall global strategy and lessons learned in hindsight now, but I want to shift over to Alex. Mayo Ventures has a really interesting way that you approach partnerships. And, if you can share for the audience, what does that look like? Who are the ideal companies that Mayo would like to partner with? And then how do they approach Mayo?
Yeah, thanks, Kristi. I think to your point, Mayo Clinic Ventures, we engage with startups and innovative companies across the spectrum of healthcare. We look at anywhere from biopharmaceuticals to med devices to even digital health and AI, which is now a very strong area of interest at Mayo Clinic. But I know a lot of companies are also very interested in that space. When we look at partners, what we typically consider first is the innovation itself. We want to approach those technologies with the lens of the techno-clinical impact. Because for us as a hospital system, what we want to do is to see the pathway from where the technology is currently until what it looks like in the market. And I think that's like for startups, that's a critical journey. And we at Mayo Clinic, we have the clinical expertise, we have data assets, IP resources, as well as the key opinion leaders that can help those companies drive that journey. And I think what we look for typically is companies that are willing to have us join in on that journey, because I think there's tremendous value that we can add to those companies. And we are really flexible too, because we view ourselves as a strategic partner. We're not a CRO. We have the key thought leaders that can really help the company ideate if they aren't quite at the stage where they have that roadmap figured out. So we view ourselves as a full partner for all those companies that are willing to engage with one of the top hospital systems in the.
And likewise, I imagine you want a partner on the other end who's very open to feedback, to approaching it as a true partnership with you, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we work with a lot of different teams, and I think our scope is very broad, so we want to work with everyone that wants to work with us. But I would say the projects and the companies that tend to make the most value out of these collaborative relationships are the ones that want to participate fully with our clinical teams. And I know there's a panel later on about getting on a plane, flying to your partner sites and doing a lot of those sessions and ideation in person. And I think Mayo Clinic especially has that culture where, companies, when they come to Mayo Clinic, you get the full experience. You sit in all these innovative meetings with the clinicians, and a lot of the ideas and concepts just get developed organically. And I think that's the beauty of working with a group like us, is that we can enable that. Like if you really want that experience and you have kind of a hypothesis of where you'd like to go, but you haven't quite figured it out, I think that's where we typically come into play and deliver the most value.
And what we had discussed earlier was really on the IP side, right? So is a company coming to you saying, we're interested in investment and we're interested in your clinician feedback? Or is it better to say, we feel like we have an idea here. Can you help us really ideate and change and make our IP stronger for what clinicians need? Or is it both?
I think there's a little bit of both, but I think the latter is where I think we deliver the most value, right? So we're a hybrid tech transfer office and a venture arm of a major hospital system. And the way we view ourselves is that we have a dual purpose, a dual value prop, and that is we have our assets, which incorporate our really broad and robust IP portfolio, our clinical data, which sometimes can be quite valuable, especially with the the emergence of AI. And additionally, we have some of the top clinical leaders, right? And these are thought leaders that, are top of their fields. They sit on major societies. They inform a lot of the standard of care. And, for a company, it's really valuable to engage and think about the assets that we can bring. And on the flip side, we have an investment vehicle, which, for us is used more as a strategic tool for us to help the company accelerate that journey and help us and the company bring that solution to the market faster. So I think there is a role for both, and we try to approach that question with which path makes the most sense, but with one caveat is that from the investment perspective, we look for that first defined collaborative relationship, because without that collaboration, it becomes very difficult for us to deploy capital, because we are not a VC investor.
Right.
We are a strategic partner for the companies, and if funding is basically used as a mechanism to help the companies really accelerate that journey.
What I found really interesting too is that, I think of maybe Mayo Clinic Ventures as early strategic partners. But I know you have a great case study of when a more mature in-market company has come to your team and have asked, like, how do we now iterate into our next gen and expand our portfolio? So can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, and I know, Mayo Clinic Ventures, we like to be early and engage with partners in the early stage, but really, if you look at the market, we work with companies across the spectrum, right? We even work with large strategics in terms of enhancing their products and solutions. But the one example that that I have in mind, Kristi, is there is a company called Optiscan. I'm sure there's maybe a few Australians in the room. I know there's a lot of Australians at the conference, but they are a publicly traded company out of Australia and based in Melbourne. And what they have developed over 20 years of technology development is this really unique optical probe that can go into the body during surgery to look at tissues and margins and be able to do that classification. So they have a mature product. They are using this in clinic and are obviously commercial. But they have an idea of engaging with Mayo Clinic to incorporate this into robotic surgery. Obviously, Mayo as a flagship institution, we do a lot of robotic surgeries. We have a lot of surgeons that really enjoy doing it. So there's a lot of innovation going on. And it really worked out really nicely because it's an innovative technology, but a new use case. And it allows Optiscan to really bring their solution to this market that is currently untapped. And the way to do this is really, you just roll up your sleeves and you map out what are the accessories you need, what are the data integrations, what are the key things that show up in the console when the surgeons are doing the procedure, and also what would be helpful for the surgeons, right? What do they see and how do they make those determinations? And we brought on one of our key clinical leaders who is an expert in robotically assisted breast surgery, and she was able to help the company figure out what they need, and they just went ahead and built it. They actually rented a space in Rochester, so they can actually the founder can actually fly from Australia to Rochester and engage with our clinicians and actually have a team on the ground to do a lot of that work. So it's just a really, really cool partnership that just showcase the power of what we can bring, and also a company willing to, even after 20 years of innovation, still wanting to improve and add value to their existing solutions, and trying to do that with a lens of looking at the trends in the market, which I think is just super critical. And last but not least, there's also a few kind of, I think, things that just happened that by chance it really helped the collaboration become even more robust. So the clinical leader actually recently joined Mayo Clinic Florida. So now essentially they're engaging with two different health systems now because you have Mayo Clinic Rochester and Florida both engaged with the collaboration. So it just allows the company to land and expand. I don't think that was by design, but when you work with Mayo Clinics, things like that tend to happen because it is a fully integrated system where people move around and there's collaborations going across campuses. So I think that's another value add for startups and companies looking to innovate with Mayo Clinic is that there is that possibility, like with the big strategic, where you could start small and then eventually grow the collaboration across geographies as well.
So how does a company reach out to Mayo Clinic Ventures to say, hey, here's a problem we think we are trying to solve for, or we're not even sure what the problem is we're trying to solve for. We just know we want to expand our portfolio. How do they start that conversation?
Yeah, I think if you're
guys reach out to you.
I think that's most of the case. I think we tell companies that our door is always open, where you can feel free to reach out to us by any of the channels. You can reach out to us on LinkedIn. We have an inbox. But I think it's also events like this, right, where everyone is here on site and there are these opportunities to connect. And we're always open to hearing about ideas, what you're working on, and also what are your hypotheses? Because I really like hearing about people's ideas and kind of breaking it down to see if we can actually add value to your project, but also B, is there a viable path to commercial value and commercial viability? Because we are hyper focused on that. I think for Mayo Clinic, we view that that commercial value is a direct impact on patients, and because the patients are so important to the equation, we always vet the ideas with that lens. So if you feel like you have something that has the potential of delivering value, and you feel like you have some ideas, feel free to engage with us, and we are happy to always be your first call. And if there's interest in moving forward, we then just engage directly with our clinical staff and clinical teams and bring them to the conversation, because I think we always help companies really upfront about their strategy, and then we can figure out the details later as we build out the project and also the pathway to that journey.
Yeah. Well, coming back to technology and how important it is to shift to really meet the needs of your patients and your clinicians, I think that was one of the key shifts that you made from 1.0 to 2.0. But in the meantime, you really had to continue forward as if there might not be a 2.0 scenario, right? So explain to us how, after you realized the partnership wasn't going to happen the first time, what then was your strategy and your plan going forward?
Yeah, I think you try to focus on the things you can control, and an acknowledgement, after you go to a round that doesn't work, is that, well, we can't control that anymore. And actually, the likelihood that you can revive it is probably very low, because if somebody gave up on you once, it's a lot harder to bring them back to zero and then get them excited. So one of the things that we did is said, look, what is in our control? Let's focus on the things that we can do. And I am a true believer that great companies are bought, they're not sold. So we try to build a truly successful independent company. Luckily, at the time, this is, we're talking about 2021, there was still some public market, and then we went through the drought, and then now we are back, or we were being told that we are back. We tried to focus on all the options we could control. And ultimately, what we acknowledged was that if you were to bring the technology to the market, we need to find a very sustainable business model. So we did a lot of work on the go-to-market strategy, which, if I can take a side note, and I have no conflict of interest in this, but in what you guys do and other service providers do, we don't need to recreate everything. The recreating the wheel is what sometimes gets the startups into trouble. There are a lot of people who their expertise is having exercised the things that failed, and you get to benefit from that. So we were very cognizant on who do we partner on the IP side, who do we partner with the regulatory pathway? Who do we partner with when we are trying to do contracting, so we don't have to reinvent and fail at everything on our own? That goes a long way to accelerate your go-to-market strategy. So going back to it, that was the focus. And in fact, the re-engagement of strategics was just basically something that you would do routinely. I think
Conferences like this.
it is, and building to build up on what you said. Think about it like an annuity. Like when you come in, we have been at LSI, every year. We haven't raised money since 21, and we are at every single one of them all the time. And we always get, this morning we got the question, oh, why are you here? You're not raising money. I'm like, there's another one coming, and I want to know everybody that they need to know. So when that one comes, and it's actually very fascinating how willing people are to listen to you when you don't have an ask. That's when you get to know each other. So then when you do have an ask, they actually trust you and they want to interact with you. So I'm a big believer in, show up, have the conversations, even if there's no immediate transactions, don't think about it transactionally.
Yeah, when I used to sit on the Medtronic BD side of the table and seeing, startups over and over again at different conferences, I think part of the building trust is you say you're going to get this amount of activity done in the next 6 months. We'll see you at the next, TCT or next conference. And then you get to that conference and you haven't accomplished any of that. So what is your story? What happened? Why haven't you gotten to where you said you were going to go? And I think that is really key. And if time and time again, you're not hitting the milestones you've set for yourself, it's really important to have not a story, but, that's part of the trust building is, as a leader, this is what I'm set to accomplish with this current funding milestone. And I understand what it's going to take there, both time and money, so that when we meet again, I can show you the progress.
It is, we're very lucky. Our CFO is probably one of the best people dealing with investors because of when we were in the public company side. And one of the things that he always reminds me, he spent a lot of time interacting with the public side, the equity research people. And, he always reminds me of the notes they take when you're having casual drinks. And it's not casual conversation. They will remember you the next time. Yeah. And it's just a human nature to be overexcited, telling them you're going to overcome the world, Yeah. And then what you say becomes so true because you're like, oh, you're going to be in 500 accounts,
Right.
And then 6 months later, somebody suddenly is like, so how's the progress? And you're like, oh, we're in 12 accounts. Yeah. And the polite people will not tell you, but in their minds, like, well, next time you say something, I'm going to adjust it down.
Yeah.
And if you're close to the anybody in this world, being a strategic institutionals or even analysts, they were like, what happened? So I think there are two really good learnings in what you're saying. Number one, going back to, if you're surrounded by the people who actually check you in, is super helpful because, we go through this exercise all the time. Just by nature, I'm a glass half full guy. It's like, why not? We're going to do something. Having people who dial your back is like, but what if we didn't? Yeah. It's like, okay, we're going to open up the range, rather than being narrowed. And number two, it's just like any other relationship that you're building. Like, people remember what you told them. Mm-hmm. It's okay to, we all miss things, but knowing that you're telling a story and that is actually what revived the relationship with Medtronic. Because when we went back with the 2.0, we really didn't have much ground, after what happened first time. So when Jason and I met, I was the most open book I've ever been. Mm-hmm. I'm like, well, here's what we fixed. Mm-hmm. And I think it's going to work, but what we're going to do is that as we go to the customers, let's listen together, which is a big risk. I had my board members at the time like, oh, what if it's like, what if the customers hate it? I'm like, if they hate it, we don't have a product. So I don't know how to make up for that.
Right. Might as well be transparent.
But it was so much credibility in when we together heard, oh, it's amazing you fixed it, because there was no setup. There was no, so I had for, your former colleagues, when they wanted to reach out to customers, I would just give them the contact information. And the first thing a strategic does when they call your customer is, who'd you talk to at the startup and what did they tell you? And, clinicians are like, oh, Ramin called and said, focus on this and this. Whereas when the answer was nothing, I had clinicians reaching out to me and like, what do you want me to say? I'm like, tell them whatever you believe. And, that builds credibility because they heard the worst they could hear is was much better than what I already told them.
Mhm.
I mean, that's how you recover and come back and build credibility. At the end of the day, it's all about the trust. I know, I feel like at every LSI panel that we have, this trust thing comes back over and over, but you can't make a deal that's hundreds of millions of dollars if there's not some level of a strong trust.
I think being open to clinician feedback too, and then being flexible to change. And I'm sure, Alex, with Mayo Clinic Ventures too, that's so important. If you're working with a company and they're really stuck, they're digging their heels in on what they think is best, but you're here providing the clinician perspective. Have there been cases like that where it's been easier or more difficult to partner with people who aren't as open to the workflow? You're a physician. Your staff is in the workflow and providing guidance.
That's a great question. I would say, I mean, typically we let the company drive the collaboration because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are accountable for commercialization, positioning the technology in the market, and also being able to close the deals that are important to the company and that will allow them to deliver the solutions to the market. I think typically the companies are very receptive to our clinicians because, first of all, there are the world experts, and I think there is that level of respect when companies do show up. They are generally receptive to our clinicians, and they want to make use of their brain power as much as possible. And then second of all, I think the way we structure about a lot of these relationships is a kind of a risk reward sharing type of arrangement. So, effectively the companies are incentivized to really engage meaningfully and be like a sponge where you absorb everything that gets kind of brought up in a conversation, because that's how you're able to capture that value, right? The whole thing about engaging with Mayo Clinic Ventures is value creation, right? That's I think that's the overarching goal. And if you can't be receptive to clinical feedback, I think that fundamentally sort of detracts from the goal. So I would say it's incredibly rare for that to happen. Most of the groups that we work with are very receptive and open.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this is one of those founder dilemmas that come in. It's not your baby. It's a company, that's a very harsh thing to say, but you have to acknowledge that, and you can't treat it like it's your baby. You have to be comfortable knowing, and there might be time that there's nothing there. If you believe in it strong enough, you should follow it through. But being able to tell that a story, and I think I am constantly reminded of the fact that telling that a story to the particular audience that you need to tell the story is very different than how you see it in your head. Sometimes you see these technical presentations that go into such a depth. It's fantastic. You lost all the investors in the first 3 minutes, or worse, you tell people about the total addressable market that they live in every day,
So off.
and you're 3 times larger or smaller. It's there goes your credibility in the first. So again, I go back into relying on the people who do this for a living is actually helpful at times. You don't need to be the expert of everything. Getting somebody who does that in a very credible way helps you, because having experienced interactions with some of the key clinicians at Mayo, sometimes the feedback comes without much of a filter. But if you really want to improve, that's what you want.
So I think what you did well, and the benefit of working with Mayo Ventures, is we often get clients saying, okay, our investors just care about that 510K clearance. So we just want to focus on regulatory. We don't really care about market access yet.
Mm-hmm.
And working with physicians, part of market access isn't just reimbursement, right? It's how are you going to get it through the value analysis committees? How are you going to get adoption? So I think that you're adding that very early on, the adoption piece, the guidelines piece. How are you going to make sure that once you do get clearance, it's actually going to be adopted? So I just want to say that's an incredible way of thinking about the Mayo Venture partnerships, as well as how important and how much you stress that that physician feedback during your process.
It is, and I think you're so right. That, I get it now because I think we've opened the door for all the angio-based, physiology technology. Like every day, I'm reminded that somebody has some probe and they're gonna have it with one view, and I welcome that. I was like, "Where's your peer-reviewed validation?
Right.
Where's your randomized controlled trial?
Right.
Where's your reimbursement?
Yeah.
Welcome to the arena. We'll meet you there. When you get there, it is far more than just that 510K, because the strategic or the investors that only cares about the 510K, the minute you give them the 510K, they're like, so what about reimbursement?
Right. Immediately.
Like, and now you're 2 years behind.
Yeah.
Because again, I go back to talk to somebody who does this for a living, because part of the job is you telling them that, oh, we will get you the 510K. You should think about the next things.
Yeah. And even going back to kind of globalization strategy, we're focused on US first, and then we're going to go to EU after. But if you're not understanding the clinical requirements for Europe when you're building your US pivotal plan, there are just maybe some slight nuances you could have covered in your US pivotal that's going to allow you to accelerate to market quicker with MDR and CE mark. So, yep, these are all things that are super important. I'm realizing we're at 5 minutes. This is supposed to be a workshop. Really want to give anyone in the audience an opportunity to ask questions, especially on the lessons learned. What worked, what didn't work, especially Ramin's experience, and then any questions on how to approach Mayo partnerships. Don't be shy.
I have a question.
Great.
I want to hear. No, it's okay. I think I'm not loud enough for me. I just want to learn also, like, so when you're engaging strategics, sometimes we start the conversation and then it takes some time to get back due to, you're sorting out the legal NDAs or whatever. It takes time, especially I come from a government partnership sort of thing while developing a product. So I've not spun out into a company. I have to take care of the legal aspects of it. And then I find it very difficult to go back now, because should I make an excuse and tell, oh, I'm sorry, things got missed? Or should we just be upfront and say, I'm really sorry, this took time to get to you, but it took a lot longer than I initially anticipated? Or, some suggestions on what do you suggest? How do we continue to engage them?
Yeah.
While also appeasing our own organizations?
Yeah, I think they live that every day. So while you are aware of that, oh, it's taking a lot longer than you want, they live it every day. And, one of the things about larger strategics is that they're not the fastest in the world either. Sometimes they have things that takes forever, so I wouldn't be shy. I think go through a process. You have to take care of what you got to do, especially if you have any government ties, the legality becomes a priority. Just go back. Don't waste time. I think there's a value given to transparent people. And then the other thing that I say is there is a value in persistent. There's difference between persistent and pesting people. Actually, strategic partners across, the different companies that I know appreciate the person who reaches out proactively. You have a reason for, every time you're somewhere, it's 30 minutes, give an update. If you have no update, give your no update. If you're stuck where we are, you keep them, because remember, every day they get calls from the moment they start the day till the end with people trying to sell them the ideas. So as much as you may think they remember the last thing you told them, they may not, So my suggestion is that don't be shy about it. Once you get through the thing, and then the other thing that it does is that it will establish a baseline that, hey, that's a kind of a timeline I'm talking about when I'm dealing with you. So if I never need to accelerate something, I have to account for whatever delay of legality or review and stuff that you have. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yes.
For Alex, I'm curious, what are your guys' screening criteria you guys use as you evaluate different medical technologies? And has that changed? Ramin kind of mentioned the funding environment has gone from, really rough to kind of improving. How has that changed over time?
I mean, I don't think it has changed very significantly, because I think the way we engage with companies as a partner is we look at the technology first and understand what is the pathway for it to become a commercially viable solution. And if we can kind of see that journey and map that journey, typically there is potential for us to engage. And I think another thing that we look at very initially is also the unmet need. What are you trying to solve? and how are you solving it? What's different from the other solutions on the market? So basically answering those fundamental questions will allow, I mean, if you can answer them, it'll allow us to really accelerate the timeline for us to find a meaningful way to engage. Because if we can answer those questions, then we can think about what is next and where we can add value. Because that's ultimately the ball game for us is being able to answer those few questions to drive to the commercial viability of the solution that you're interested in developing.
I think a common theme across very successful, commercially viable technology for anybody who's working on a new technology is that unmet need. The benefit of a Mayo's or a Stanford by design is that they do a very good gut check in upfront. Is this an unmet need? And the way to know if it's an unmet need or not, it shouldn't take more than 30 seconds for you to describe what you're solving for and get a broad agreement. If it takes 5 minutes for you to explain the clinical issues you're solving for, is not big enough for anybody who have thought about it. So I think that's a big, are you on a right path or, no, you need to fine tune it.
And I think many times, especially early stage companies, when they're engaging with VCs, they are focused on the market sizing, the opportunity, and all that information. And I think for us, that's a little more granular, right? I think when we're looking at the solution initially, initial assessment is truly a high level understanding of the unmet need and how your technology is solving those challenges. And if you can kind of have an idea of what that is, that's usually enough for us to continue the conversation to start digging into the details and mapping out that pathway.
Yeah, so 1 million patients, 36 million patients is a lot. Still, just go for it. It doesn't matter where you are in the range.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much. We're at time. I have 1,000 more questions for you, as I'm sure people in the audience do. So please seek out both Ramin and Alex and myself if you'd like, and we'll be here the rest of the day.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.